This is Tom Dillon, the Lifetime Liberal. Today is Thursday, December 11th, 2025. The title of this rant is More Deregulation by Republicans Equals Financial Disaster for All Americans. So Scott Bessent, who is the Secretary of Treasury, has indicated that he wants to change a committee within the Treasury that regulates what regulation is. Let's just say, I'm just going to go into the big things, the banks, the private equity, the shadow banking, all kinds of financial instruments that are out there. And they're going to look at deregulation. Now, let's just go back to the main principle of what they're trying to say. They're trying to say the more we deregulate, the more money that you can make. Whereas it's not really that way, because the more deregulation that banks get, that financial shadow banking gets, that private equity gets, etc., is more ways for them to gum everything up to make more money for themselves and screw you short-term, long-term, let's say forever. That's their principle. That's what they want to do. And again, regulation, the opposite of regulation is protection. And so what he's basically saying, we want to cut out the protections that help and protect the American people from these banks and shadow banking and private equity funds and all kinds of other financial instruments from going too far, gumming up things, causing disaster within our economy, because we've had many, many disasters. And I just want to go back on one thing real quick. After the banking crisis in the 1930s, we put a lot of regulations in, which were really, really protections, the Bureau of Protections, and we really never had we had some minor recessions in the 50s, if I remember correctly. But we really didn't have that many or anything that big after that, until after there became some types of deregulation where our protections were lost. And at the time, there were banks and there were savings and loans. And the savings and loans were not banks, but then all of a sudden the savings and loans said, hey, we want to be like banks. We want to be just like banks. But the protections that were in there for banks weren't in there for the savings and loans. And we had a huge savings and loan crisis, and I think in the late 80s. Obviously, thank you, Ronald Reagan, as deregulation was started around when Reagan came in. And we've had a number of those things after that. And of course, the big one, we had the internet bubble in the late 90s. Then we had the Great Recession in 2008. And remember, it's all because regulations were so loose, protections were so loose that banks, they got to the point where they got in trouble, and we had the idea of they're too big to fail. So what does Scott Bessent want to do? We're not in great financial shape right now, especially with the things that Trump is doing. And don't want to get into every one of them. But what does he want to do? He wants to go in and he wants to deregulate some of the things that need to be regulated, because we need those protections for the American people. Now, remember what I said just a minute ago is who benefits from all of this? Because the top dogs at all these banking, shadow banking, private equity, financial instruments, and all this other stuff, when they do something financially, they always make sure that their asses are covered first and our asses are covered last. And if it goes under, they still make gobs and gobs of money. So they can be as reckless as they want to be. And that's exactly what they want to do, is be as reckless as they want to be, because the chances of making more money are obviously there. And let's just say that they have a high threshold of risk. And but when it's not their money, why do they care? They'll just go out and do it again somewhere else some other time. Now, a lot of things have changed since 2008. There has been more there has been some deregulation, especially with Trump, and he's doing it again. And we're the ones that are going to be caught in it, and we're the ones that are going to have to pay. And let me just go into how some of that works from, let's say, legislative or whatever. So let's just say it's a bill that has to be passed by Congress. All right. Well, all the people who are representing representing by lobbying or whatever, they're all making $300, $500 or more $1,000 per year. Most of them are white. Most of them are men. All right. They've got their legislative chops. Maybe they worked in the House and the Senate. Maybe they were a staffer. Maybe they're a chief person on a committee, a legislative person on a committee. They go to all the conventions. They keep in touch with people. They know what's going on. They know how the legislative process works, and they know what they have to do. And what do? They go in. They take the current legislation. They cut something out. They cut a paragraph out. They cut a line out. They cut a sentence out. They put commas in between something else to make it look different. They do all of these things to gum up the works. All right, but the main premise of the whole thing is to make these financial companies richer and richer, that they can have more risk, but it doesn't make any difference, because if it fails, they're still making all the money, and the ones that are left holding the shit are us. Now, I know that there's a lot going on, especially with Jeffrey Epstein, that's Venezuela, and all this other stuff, and that's all important stuff. But this is what they're trying to do behind the scenes, day in and day out, is screw the average working person. This, and again, all the other stuff is just glitter. It's just, a shiny object here. Look at all this stuff I'm doing. I'm making an east wing, right? But in the meantime, I'm screwing you out of millions of dollars to anyone. And this is going to continue. That's all they want to do, is to strip the American people from as much money as possible. There's already been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from poor and the average working American to the rich over the last 50 years. It's got to stop. This is something we need to go after, and to go after mightily. Again, I know that there are some corporate Democrats out there, etc., but we have to elect every single person from now on, as many Democrats as we possibly can, because the Republicans do this every single time they get into power. And who pays for it? We pay for it. We have to go after them. Vote blue unendingly.